Hello and welcome to this episode of TheSquare. I'm Poonam Schallenberger and I'm here today with Brett Sumrow, sector leader in our education practice. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you, Poonam. I'm glad to be here.
So glad to have you. I'm glad to be talking today a little bit about education and fast growth and how districts are able to navigate changes within their district, but also within the education practice and the curriculum as a whole. You've been at Corgan for how many years now?
24.
24. And most of them working with the District of Frisco, right?
I've spent my entire career in the education sector at Corgan, and a lot of that, I want to say 12 to 14 years, I worked exclusively with Frisco ISD because of their rapid growth and just the amount of projects that they had every year and the partnership we had and what we were delivering for them.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of benefits when you're able to have tenure with an architect as well as the administration to be able to help navigate the changes that a district might be experiencing with the community, with demographic changes, with students, but then also helping them understand what changes in education technology or student expectations might mean for that school or for their community as well.
Well, absolutely, because we really got to understand their standards, and equity was a big thing with them. Make sure that all students were having equal opportunities, whether they were existing schools or new campuses, keeping up with their growth. All of that, the partnership and the trust that we had to have, because sometimes we had to move very quickly when the winds of their demographics were changing.
Yeah, Frisco has an interesting story, right? There's exponential growth in the neighborhood, but they were able to still preserve the quality of education for their students, and so much so that they were able to build a sort of national reputation for their curriculum and for the quality of their education.
Yeah. Well, so Frisco, for a short time, they were the fastest growing school district in the nation.
Wow.
And that was kind of during those years that we were doing, for a while we were doing 4 new schools for them a year. I think the most they opened in one year were 6. They did have one other architect at the time serving them.
For comparison, what does an average district's new school rate look like?
It depends on what growth mode they're in.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you at the time how many districts were opening, 1 or 2 schools every couple of years versus Frisco 4 to 6 in that peak time of growth for them a year. But that's not something that just Frisco ISD faces or was facing. A lot of fast growth districts have these issues. It's can you keep up with the growth in terms of schools? Because what we do know is when you start putting too many kids in a classroom, or you start having portable classrooms, that potentially the quality of that educational environment diminishes, and it can have adverse effects on the kids and the performance.
Right, and it's probably also managing, well, we're building this school, but this school needs a repair on whatever at the same time, and how are we going to manage the flow of all of the students?
So that's interesting because, the perception was that in Frisco during that time that all their schools were new. But then you looked up, and now their oldest school was 25 years old, and no one perceived it that way because it was more about keeping up with the growth. But yes, you start having equipment, life cycle issues where equipment starts just aging out, and you have to start replacing it, whether it be mechanical equipment, roofs, things like that. And so there's this schedule of maintaining and replacing those items while also trying to keep up with the new construction and the new growth, and keeping those standards consistent across the district.
So you're adding new schools to the district, expanding, maintaining, renovating existing schools. What are some solutions or design approaches that kind of helped with managing that growth?
Well, so I think that's 2 different things. But when you look at the growth aspect, fast growth districts sometimes are growing so fast that when you're growing, like for Frisco, for example, at one time they were growing over 3,000 kids per year. And most of that growth was at the primary level. Their schools, their community had decided that they wanted what they call the small school model or neighborhood school model for elementary schools. So their capacity was 720 to 750 kids.
Okay.
But if you're growing by 3,000 kids a year, that's 4 elementary schools, if they were all elementary school kids. And so to keep up with that growth, what one of the strategies that we employed was prototype designs. So we designed an elementary school, and then we would build it on multiple sites in multiple years. Some of the advantages, number one, is you can kind of think of that first one as a prototype or a mock-up where during construction, there's always issues that arise on any project. But we're able to document those, update the drawings, and so when you build that site or that school again on a future site, there's less issues that arise. There's less unknowns that get discovered through that normal construction process, which is a benefit to us, the construction team, as well as the school district. Additionally, those prototype designs let you react a little more quickly and get schools out. And the most extreme example I can give is we got a call one year in September, and the district, they had just gotten an updated demographic report and saw their first day enrollment numbers and said, we need another elementary school open next fall.
Wow.
So next August, so less than a year. And so we had to figure out, well, how are we going to get this done? And, it had to be a prototype. We initially had to get a CM on board, construction manager. We had to work with the city on permitting and scheduling because it was going to be a different process. We needed to streamline that process as well. And the funny thing is, we issued an RFP, construction manager at risk. About a week after we issued that, we got a phone call from the district, and they said, oh, by the way, we need 2 schools. And so easy enough, we pivoted. We had the sites. About 6 weeks, we redeveloped those plans for those new sites, had the CM on board, got it bid, started construction, several meetings, partnerships with the city, with the school district. And we actually finished construction of those schools in June of the next year.
And you would credit most of that success to the prototyping?
That was a big part of it, yes. Mm-hmm. Because normally that process would take 2 years, and we did it in less than 1. Normally, on a normal schedule, CDs, design to CDs on an elementary school is about 6 months, and then construction was 14 to 16 months. And so we shortened it not only for the prototype, but also the understanding we had with the district, the partnership that we had with them, knowing their standards. So a lot of the things that we would have to learn from a client at the beginning of the project, we already know. That knowledge base we already have. Right. And those drawings are already there. It's not as simple as just saying, here, build this again. There was still work we had to do, to get that to a point where we could. And just because you're prototyping doesn't mean all these schools are exactly the same. Right. They all have different foundation systems. They have different sites. There's different circulation patterns. And the other thing we try to do, just the building itself, because these are neighborhood schools, and this particular district, they don't have mascots at their elementary school level. But still, there's a branding that takes place on these campuses, colors and patterns and those type things. And if we kept them all the same, then there's no real identity for one school versus another for these kids in these neighborhoods. So the colors, the patterns, those type things, both interior and exterior, we do change that on all of these. So they are a level of unique as much as they can be.
Yeah, it seems that prototyping allows you some efficiency and even equality, right? Like if you're sending your kid to a school, you want to know that it has all the same perks and features that the school down the street has. But what opportunities are there to kind of customize a school? You talked about colors or maybe the interiors and exteriors. How do you create a sense of identity while preserving that sort of equality across the board and do it quickly?
Well, I mean, that's part of it, right? That I already mentioned that, because the schools, they adopt their school colors and their branding and from these palettes that we're helping to create for each one, both interior and exterior. And also we do, even though most of these particular campuses were in suburban neighborhoods, we still want to kind of take some flair from that in terms of brick colors and patterns and and some of those styles as well, so that they do have their own sense of place, if you will,
Sure.
for those kids.
You know, you mentioned, Brett, that you can't just take a prototype and be like, great, here you go, run with it. What are some considerations and some challenges of working with prototypes, and how do you solve for them?
Is even though we want to think about equity, and we want to, and we talked about kind of making those small shifts on the colors and the patterns for that identity, but also we still want to make improvements. You know, building codes change, equipment changes, systems change, and we want to still continue improving. The equipment's more energy efficient. At one point, you know, we switched from a 4-pipe mechanical system with boilers and chillers to geothermal system that's more efficient for the school district. And so things like that, if we built, you know, 10 years later with the exact same details from 10 years ago, then we wouldn't be keeping up with just the industry and building science. So it may not be something that most people walking into that campus see or perceive, but the district maintenance and operation people absolutely do.
Sure.
Because they'll see the direct benefit. In fact, we actually at one point charted these prototype schools that were built over the years and their energy usage. And what it showed is the more recent schools were using less energy because of those improvements that most people don't see.
Yeah. Probably even just relying on maybe not relying on a prototype, but starting with a prototype now allows architects and designers to focus on new ways to add efficiencies and improve a school.
And the reason for the prototype, that's a benefit, but the real reason for it was to keep up with the growth.
Yeah.
To keep up with the speed at which this particular district was having to build campuses. You know, and more recently they've slowed down, and that's not quite as big of a need, you know, to keep up with that. You know, the fact it's funny, they used to say we've got to build these schools as fast as we can, and now they're trying to build them, you know, as slowly as they can, because at some point, you know, you don't want to outbid that growth. And,
Sure.
And that's the thing too with fast growth districts, is to really understand where your growth is now, but where it's going, and where you might top out, what the developable land is. They all have demographers that they produce demographic reports that kind of show them that. A normal district might get an updated report every 2 years. A fast growth district could be twice a year. There's some that do it 4 times a year because of that rapid growth, so that they understand not only that it's coming, but where it's coming.
Right.
The other thing about the prototype is that thing about where it's coming. We have had districts where we're designing a prototype school on 4 different sites because they know the growth is coming, but they don't have a really good feel of exactly where it's going first. And so we got to 100% CDs before we even knew which sites we were actually going to bid. And then we bid 2. The other 2 then we stick in the drawer, and then a year or 2 later they pull those out. You know, we might have to make a couple of updates, and then we issue those. So by having that prototype, you know, not only from an efficiency of us drawing, but also the district being able to then build those, and the cost and expenses and the resources that they put into, you know, design fees to produce those drawings are not for waste.
So you mentioned that knowing that your growth is coming, but where it's coming is an especially important thing to know. For districts who are kind of facing this growth or expecting it, what advice or kind of what other sort of watch out for lessons have you come away with?
I think the biggest for districts is to get out ahead of it and understand that it's coming. Most of the time, and form relationships with the developers that are in your district. Because most of the time those developers will actually come and work with the district and sometimes donate or at least sell land for a school. It's beneficial to the developers as well, because it helps them buy lots, because people want to, you know, it's advantageous to have a school in your neighborhood. And so it's a positive for them. So they'll usually work with the school districts, but if you know the growth is coming and you can buy those lots earlier, and then what we've done to help partner with districts is then do test fits as they're finalizing those lots to make sure that both the size, the layout, the proportions of the site, as well as utilities, infrastructure, if there's floodplain issues or there was big areas of fill, whatever, that they understand what the development costs are for that site when they purchase it, and that we know it's workable.
Right.
So that you have that planning well before you actually need to build on it. Because if in the scenario that I gave you a minute ago about needing a school, in less than a year, if that district didn't already own those sites, we couldn't have delivered.
And that's probably where having those relationships really helps too, and having a sort of history in that community where you might have a site, but to know kind of, oh, well, this landowner next door might pose an issue, or, the roadways and the circulation and all of that.
Absolutely. Well, and an example, so one of those fast-paced ones, there was a wetlands on that site that we knew about. And so we had already worked with the district, with the Corps of Engineers, on all the permits to be able to modify that and develop that site. Same thing. If that work hadn't been done ahead of time, we could not have delivered that school in 10 months like we did.
Yeah. So getting out ahead of it, knowing that you have the growth coming, knowing where that growth is coming. What other advice might you offer districts who are looking at needing to scale quickly?
So the thing about school districts is, they are local, and there is different strategies, and knowing what your build-out plan looks like. For example, Frisco ISD, we talked about the elementary schools being neighborhood schools. Middle schools are similar, but they're high schools. Frisco's high school model, they used to call it the small school model, which at the time they developed it was to stay 4A. It's now 5A, 2,100 students, which for a lot of school districts, 2,100 students is not small. But when you compare to districts that have 6,000 students at their high school, or 5,000 students, 4,000 students, 2,000 is still small. They now call it the student opportunity model.
Okay.
The thought is, and as a community, the reason that was important for them, and it's not for all communities, but why what's important for them was by having, as an example, 4 high schools at 2,000 kids each versus 1 high school at 8. You have 4 starting quarterbacks. You have, 4 full-size bands. You have, 4 football teams, 4 volleyball teams, 4 varsity. And so there's more opportunities for more kids to participate in those different events.
Sure.
Whereas at a larger school, you get 1 quarterback. And so for them, they felt like that was a better experience for the kids, for what they wanted. That was a community decision. As Frisco started to grow and their growth slowed down, there was a push from some community members to look at, well, if we just built bigger high schools, we wouldn't have to have as many. It would save on operational cost, which is all true. So they did a community outreach. They had some meetings. They did a survey. They got feedback from the community. What's important to you? Understanding these. Do we need to pivot? This worked for us for so long. Is this still who we are? And overwhelmingly, that community said, yes, we still want this student opportunity model, that this 2,100 student 5A high school model, which meant they would have a few more. Yeah. So when the district is planning, now you know how to plan based on your demographics, how many high schools you're going to have. You can look at that not just for today, but in the future on operational costs, because there is a cost to it. Because not only do you have 4 starting quarterbacks, you have 4 high school principals. Yeah. And of course, Frisco now has 12 high schools. So, but the community said this is what's important to us. And so having that trust with your community and letting the community help identify that roadmap for you is very important.
Yeah, that idea of community engagement and being able to participate and have voice and agency over the development of their own district, is especially important for schools. Can you help me understand how you did that at Frisco and just some lessons that you walked away with that really maybe lent itself to the success of the end product?
Well, in terms of what we just talked about in terms of the school model and that community engagement, that was really the school district. We're there as a partner helping them kind of look at the scenarios. For example, we did help them with what would a 3,500 student high school look like if the community wanted to go that route. So it's supporting the district on that level. We've helped them. Same thing when you have to do a bond election and fund these projects, is try to identify, well, what would this look like? What are the scenarios? That's really how we've partnered with the community. With the school district, through the community. And I think that's important too. It's that trust, and like I say, we have the experience and know the district standards, and we can do those things pretty quickly.
Over the past 20 years, Frisco has seen a lot of growth.
Mm-hmm.
Past 15 years that you've been there, you've helped them figure out how to get to the number of schools that they're at now. But in the process, you've also seen them through some pretty significant changes as it relates to education, the delivery of curriculums, and quickly changing curriculums. How does the fast growth and the need to quickly design schools, does that complicate adding these new elements in or changing curriculums, or does that help the process? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. So the interesting thing, in Frisco was when their first prototype elementary school was designed in, I want to say it was the early 90s. It had some spaces in it that, at the time were different than a lot of schools. And most schools at the time were double-loaded corridors, corridor with classrooms on both sides. Yeah. Frisco, so we developed a plan that organized the school into 3 pods, is what we called them, but 3 wings that had the classrooms circling around an open area in the middle. That open area at the time was a computer lab, a wired computer lab. And so all those kids shared, and the kids from the classroom, different classes, came out at different times to use that lab and moved around. Over time, and so every time we redesign, we did redesign the prototype. They might have built 8 to 10, and then we would redesign it, make some changes. But it was always kind of reorganization of the same pieces. And so that classroom pod stayed pretty much intact from there all the way up to Elementary School 42, which opened in 2000 and, I don't know that it really matters, but 2015. And actually my son goes to school there.
Hey.
But those classroom pods were the same. The difference is we no longer have wired computer labs. So that space has been completely changed into just an open collaborative space that, the changing in education models has changed too, where it's gone away from teacher-centric to more student-centric.
Right.
Because used to, the teacher was the person who had the information, and all the kids had to learn from that teacher standing in the front of the room in a lecture style or writing on the board or whatever. Well, now kids have access to information through their iPads or phones or Google Chromebooks or whatever, and so from each other.
It's a lot more self-led.
It's hands-on. The teacher really is more of a guide now, and the kids are allowed to explore and figure things out on their own more and use the resources available to them. And so now that space that used to be a wired computer lab, the kid can take their computer anywhere in the school, and it functions and it operates. And so kids are coming out there, and it's not just one whole class coming out at a time. You may have 3 or 4 kids from several classes getting in there, working together. So no longer is your group just the 20 kids or 22 kids in your classroom. You're actually able to integrate with other students from other classes as well into those spaces. And that's really more where education is going, is empower that student to explore on their own within some guide rails.
Right. And then it becomes the prototype's job to be designed such that it can quickly adapt to and be reconfigured, like you said, to accommodate these changes.
Yeah, because, when we design these schools, we're designing the place for these great things to happen. And the more different functions that can happen in a space, the better. And the more ways, whether it's a small intimate group of 2 or 3 kids or a class or 2 classes together. So that's really what we want, is spaces that are interchangeable. And our prototypes have stayed pretty consistent to being able to do that, with just some minor tweaks here and there along the way. Now, their most recent school is quite a drastic change to that. And so they are exploring how to push that more. We're designing a middle school right now for them that changes that concept quite a bit.
What was the driver behind that change?
I think as Frisco slowed down in their growth, they were able to kind of look at a bigger shift. And they're actually looking at ways as their older campuses come up on more of these 20, 25-year renovations to go try to kind of create these spaces here too. But it is that concept of, the learning doesn't happen in the classroom, but taking it even further. And what we really wanted to do on that one is create spaces that are connected but discrete enough that you can have different groups. So we never had before, but now in the middle schools there is a space where all of the 7th grade can be together at one time, and all of the 8th grade, and all of the 6th grade, all at the same time in 3 separate spaces. Yeah. We have a space where the entire school can be together at the same time, or any subsets thereof. We've never had that before. And so teachers too. It's not just about the students being able to do this, but teachers need spaces. And that's one of the things we always hear. We don't have a place where we can plan. So now we have spaces that can serve both.
So Brett, you've been working with Frisco ISD for almost 25 years. Can you tell us a little bit about the district, where it's located, and about its growth?
Well, so the growth of Frisco ISD has really paralleled the growth of the city of Frisco. And Frisco is a city located north of Dallas, up on the tollway, north of Plano. And when I started working there was around 30,000 residents, and Frisco's now over 200,000. And so that's just from, in the span of a little over 20 years. The thing about Frisco, a lot of communities like theirs would be resistant to growth and really kind of do everything they can not to grow. But this area in North Texas has been attractive for years. We have low cost of property relative to the rest of the country. There's a lot of opportunity for employment, for high-paying jobs, and so people move here. And Frisco ISD, the city of Frisco, they recognized, they had one city manager, and they recognized that the growth was coming. So we can either fight it or we can embrace it, and we can plan for it. And that's really what the city of Frisco did. And so it was strategic. They had a plan for growth, and the ISD was a partner in that. In fact, Frisco ISD and the city of Frisco, their partnership that has really sustained over all these years it's a big reason for the success of both, and they'll both admit that. But it's also served as an example to other cities and other school districts on how they can partner and for a mutually beneficial relationship. And so Frisco now is a city that the catalyst of the growth was the mall, Stonebriar Mall. When Stonebriar Mall opened, and people said this mall will never work here, but the visionaries in Frisco said, yes, it will. And it will. It did, and it attracted other venues and then other developments. And now there's every major sport is now in Frisco. There's the Rough Riders, the minor league baseball team. There's FC Dallas, professional soccer team. There's the Stars Center, so there's Stars practice facility and minor league hockey team. The Dallas Cowboys have their off-season home up there as well. PGA just moved up there. All of those were partnerships with the city, and several of those, the ISD was a partner in that as well. So if you live in Frisco, you really don't even have to leave, especially now with, flexible work arrangements and things like that. You've got, restaurants, shopping, entertainment. The one thing that they don't really have is a really strong arts venue. There are opportunity for arts, but they're kind of dispersed, and they're really trying to strengthen that, and they're working on that right now as well. And so Frisco really, it's got everything that you need right there.
So Brett, for other districts that are trying to navigate the same kind of change and growth, what could they learn from Frisco ISD?
Well, I think Frisco ISD has served as an example as well as a resource for other school districts. I know of some districts who have reached out to Frisco ISD and come and met with them and talked to them about how they navigated the growth. You've got to realize when Frisco was at the height of their growth, they were looking around not just in Texas, but across the United States to find another district going through something similar, and they couldn't find it. I mean, I can't remember, I wish I knew the exact years, but it's like a 10-year period, they grew by over 1,000%. And so that's, when you're 15,000 kids and you're growing by 3,000 kids a year, that's a big number. And so, I think a lot of us always want to learn from our peers that have maybe been through something before, and school districts are no different. So they've reached out to Frisco ISD to see how they planned for this and how they got ahead of it so that they didn't get caught in a bad situation. And then we as architects and Corgan, we've done the same. We've relied on and fallen back on our experience through those years and helping Frisco ISD navigate their growth as we're serving other school districts, either advising them on some of their planning methodologies or things or projects, district standard specifications, educational specifications, those type things. We've been through that before, so we can offer advice and help guide them as they navigate similar times of growth.
Okay, what was your favorite project or favorite story that you can tell me about your work with Frisco ISD?
Ooh, I have two.
Okay, let's hear them.
I have two. So one was, this is actually probably the most rewarding time in my career ever. And it was Libby Cash Moss Middle School. So every year, Frisco ISD, when they open new campuses, they would have a school. So all of their elementary schools and middle schools were named after influential people that had a history with Frisco ISD. And they would always have a dedication right at the beginning of the school year for that campus. And at Libby Cash Moss Middle School, I attend all of them. And so I was walking up to the school to walk inside, and they had the cheerleaders working as ambassadors and holding open the doors for people. And I'm walking up to the door, and this girl, and so she had to be in 7th or 8th grade. I just happened to be walking in next to her family. I didn't know her. I didn't know her family. But she lets go of the door, and she runs up, and she grabs this man next to me's hand and says, "Dad, I can't wait to show you my school."
Oh.
And that was just so rewarding, because I can tell you, when I was a kid, I never felt that way about any school I ever went to. So to know that that what we're doing actually has an impact on these young people's lives and their educational careers is very rewarding.
Yeah. Second one.
So my second one is Independence High School. So for quite a while, Corgan was designing all of the elementaries and middle schools for the school district, and a different architect was designing high schools. And the board decided they wanted Corgan to design their next high school, and they had a specific idea in mind for what they wanted it to look like. Basically, at the time, Frisco ISD, at their high schools, they wanted them to be traditional. That said education to them. And so we went through a extensive visioning process to define what traditional meant for that board at the time.
Sure.
And then we designed Independence High School. And to this day, I have board members tell me that that is their favorite school, that basically we nailed it, gave them exactly what they wanted. Because before I've heard them say, well, people don't listen to us when we say what we want. So they said, Corgan, y'all listen. You get it. This is exactly what our vision was. You executed it to perfection. And the thing about it to me is, it's not the style I would have designed if I had, carte blanche to do anything. But we're not always designing for ourselves. We're designing for our clients. And so to take what they wanted, their vision that we helped draw out of them, and execute it in a way that we can be proud, even if it's not our personal preference. And then to hear 8 years, or it's almost 10, it's been open 10 years now. So 10 years later, that's still their favorite school. That's pretty rewarding too. Plus, my son will go to school there in a few years.
Bonus points.
Bonus points.
Well, I think that's both those stories are so special because, again, as that district has grown so quickly, navigating the changes of their demographic growth and educational curriculum changes as well, they both point to the enduring value of schools and the enduring spaces that they have in our lives personally and for our community. So even while a district is growing, so important to think about how it's going to continue to serve the neighborhood for years to come.
Well, at Corgan and serving school districts, they are local and they are about community, and we're a part of these communities too. We have several senior leaders and employees at Corgan who live in Frisco, myself obviously included. And we have employees that live in other school districts that are our clients as well. And then we always want to participate in education foundation events or school events and those type things to help give back and be a part of that community as well, because that's really why we're here. Yeah. To help serve our clients, but also the future generations of learners that are really the future of our world and our society.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time, Brett. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you, Poonam. I enjoyed our conversation.
And thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you the next time on The Square.